A poor mechanic walked into the Porsche factory, and what he did left the engineers in shock. The August sun beat down on Mexico City when Roberto Mendoza arrived at the main entrance of Porsche Mexico's facilities in Santa Fe. At 38 years old, with calloused hands stained with grease that no soap could completely clean, Roberto felt completely out of place in that ultra-modern glass and steel complex. He wore his only dress shirt, slightly faded but impeccably ironed, and a pair of jeans that he had washed 3 times the night before to remove any traces of oil. In his worn backpack, he carried a resume printed at a neighborhood stationery store and 20 years of experience working with engines that seemed worthless in front of the imposing facade of that German company. Roberto knew that his chances of getting a job there were practically nil, but desperation has a peculiar way of pushing people beyond their fears. Before continuing the story, please help the channel by subscribing and leaving your like. That way we can continue to bring you more stories like this one. Roberto Mendoza's story was that of thousands of Mexican mechanics who had dedicated their lives to the trade without receiving the recognition they deserved. He had started as an apprentice at age 15 in a small workshop in the Doctores neighborhood, where his father worked repairing taxis and minibuses. Over 2 decades, Roberto had developed an almost supernatural ability to diagnose mechanical problems. He could identify engine faults just by listening to the sound. He knew exactly which component was failing when a customer described vague symptoms and had that technical intuition that no school can teach. That knowledge can only be acquired after thousands of hours with your hands immersed in the heart of vehicles. 3 months ago, the workshop where he worked had closed down for good. Don Armando, the owner and friend of his father, had struggled for years against economic difficulties, but the pandemic and competition from larger workshops had finally defeated him. Roberto suddenly found himself unemployed, with a wife pregnant with their third child and 2 school-age girls who depended entirely on him. He had looked for work at dozens of repair shops throughout the city, but the economic situation was difficult for everyone, and no one was hiring new mechanics without being able to offer them a decent salary. The previous morning, Roberto had been working on the street, offering his services as a mobile mechanic at a traffic light on Insurgente Sur, when he overheard a conversation between 2 men in a black Mercedes-Benz. They were talking about a complex technical problem they were facing at Porsche Mexico, something related to the cooling system of high-performance engines that no one on the technical team had been able to solve. Roberto had worked for years with cooling systems in all kinds of vehicles, from old taxis to cargo trucks, and he immediately recognized the problem from the description he heard. It was a known fault in certain types of electronic thermostats combined with faulty temperature sensors, something he had solved dozens of times with different variations. That night, Roberto could hardly sleep. A crazy idea had germinated in his mind. What if he went directly to Porsche and offered to help them with that problem? It was crazy. He knew that perfectly well. What chance did a street mechanic have of being welcomed into a German luxury car company? But the desperation to feed his family was stronger than the fear of rejection. If he didn't try something different, he would end up accepting any low-paying job he could find, wasting 2 decades of experience and knowledge. Now, standing in front of the glass reception desk at Porsche Mexico, Roberto felt his heart beating so hard that he was sure the elegant receptionist could hear it. The woman, dressed in an impeccable black suit and perfect makeup, watched him with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion as he approached the counter. It was obvious that Roberto did not fit in with the usual type of visitor to those facilities. "Good morning," Roberto said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'd like to speak to someone in the technical department. I have information about a problem you're having with your cooling systems." The receptionist raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the direct statement from this man who was obviously neither an engineer nor an executive. "Do you have an appointment, sir?" she asked in a professional but distant tone. "No, ma'am, I don't have an appointment," Roberto admitted, feeling his cheeks burn. "But I can really help you with that technical problem. I'm a mechanic specializing in cooling systems, and I think I know exactly what's wrong." The receptionist kept her expression neutral, but Roberto could see the skepticism in her eyes. "I'm sorry, sir, but we can't allow visitors without an appointment. If you'd like, you can leave your contact information and please," Roberto interrupted, aware that he sounded desperate but unable to contain himself. I just need 5 minutes with someone from the technical team. I heard you're having a problem with overheating in some high-performance engines, and I can explain exactly what's causing it and how to fix it. At that moment, a man in his 50s, dressed in jeans and a casual Porsche shirt, was walking through the lobby toward the exit. Something in the conversation caught his attention, and he stopped a few feet from the reception desk. Watching the scene with interest, Roberto didn't notice, focused as he was on trying to convince the receptionist. "Look, miss," Roberto continued, taking some crumpled sheets of paper out of his backpack on which he had drawn technical diagrams the night before. "Here is the typical cooling system for six-cylinder boxer engines. The problem you are having is because the temperature sensors are sending erroneous readings to the control unit when the engine reaches extreme temperatures under high-performance conditions. This causes the thermal management system to fail to activate the auxiliary coolant pumps at the right time." The man in the Porsche shirt approached slowly, intrigued by the highly specific technical explanation coming from the mouth of this mechanic who clearly did not belong to the corporate world of the company. Roberto finally noticed him and felt even more nervous, thinking that he was probably some executive who had come to remove him from the building. "Sorry for overhearing your conversation," said the man with an accent that betrayed years of living in Germany, although he spoke perfect Spanish. "You said that the sensors are sending erroneous readings at high temperatures." Roberto swallowed hard and nodded, preparing to be escorted out of the building. "Yes, sir, it's a known problem in certain models of temperature sensors manufactured between 2019 and 2021. The sensor component material degrades when repeatedly exposed to temperatures above 110 degrees, which often occurs in high-performance engines during intensive use. The solution is not only to replace the sensors, but also to recalibrate the thermal management software to activate the auxiliary pumps a little earlier as a preventive measure." The man looked at Roberto with an intensity that made him feel as if he were being x-rayed. Then he looked at the crumpled diagrams Roberto was holding in his grease-stained hands. "How do you know about this specific problem?" he asked with genuine curiosity. "I've been working with engines for 20 years, sir," Roberto replied with the dignity of someone who is proud of his craft. "I've repaired all kinds of cooling systems, from the simplest to the most complex. I've seen this type of failure in different variations, in multiple makes and models. The physics of the problem are always the same, only the specific components change." The man extended his hand to Roberto. "Klaus Zimmerman, I'm the technical director of Porsche Mexico. Please come with me." Roberto shook Klaus's hand, feeling like he was living a dream or perhaps a nightmare from which he would wake up at any moment. The receptionist watched the scene with her mouth slightly open, clearly surprised by the turn of events. Klaus led Roberto through bright corridors decorated with historical photographs of Porsche vehicles, passing glass-walled offices where engineers worked in front of multiple computer screens. Finally, they arrived at a spacious technical workshop that looked like something out of a science fiction movie. There were several Porsche 911s with their hoods open, connected to computerized diagnostic equipment that displayed graphs and data on huge screens. "Indeed, we have a problem that we've been investigating for 3 weeks," Klaus explained as they walked between the vehicles. "Several 911 GT3s are overheating during track use, specifically when subjected to prolonged high-demand sessions. We have replaced thermostats, checked the entire cooling system, and updated the engine management software. But the problem persists in approximately 30% of the units we have checked." Roberto approached one of the vehicles and looked at the diagnostic screens. His eyes, accustomed to interpreting mechanical data, quickly scanned the temperature graphs. "Can I see the coolant temperature sensor?" he asked respectfully but without shyness. Klaus nodded and pointed out where it was located. Roberto leaned over the engine, that six-cylinder boxer engine, which was a masterpiece of German engineering. Although it was completely different from the taxi and truck engines he normally worked on, Roberto immediately recognized the fundamental principles. An engine is an engine, he thought, regardless of whether it costs $1,000 or $1,000,000. With confident, knowledgeable movements, Roberto inspected the temperature sensor, the electrical connections, and the component's location in relation to the coolant flow. Then he asked permission to check the vehicle's data history on the diagnostic computer. Klaus watched in fascination as the street mechanic navigated the complex diagnostic systems with an intuition that came not from formal training, but from 2 decades of pure experience. The sensor is located very close to the exhaust manifold in this specific model, Roberto explained after several minutes of analysis. Look, he pointed to a spot on the engine. The thermal radiation from the exhaust, especially during intensive track use, is affecting the sensor, even though it is not in direct contact with it. The sensor correctly measures the coolant temperature, but its own internal electronics are affected by the radiant heat from the exhaust. This causes it to intermittently send erroneous signals to the control unit, especially after 20 or 30 minutes of intensive use. Klaus exchanged glances with 2 engineers who had come over to listen to the explanation. "We have verified the sensor readings, and they appear to be correct," said one of the engineers with some skepticism. "The readings are correct when they are checked here in the workshop," Roberto replied respectfully but firmly. "The problem only manifests itself during prolonged intensive use on the track, when the exhaust manifold reaches extreme temperatures and thermal radiation affects the sensor's electronics. To verify this, they would need to monitor the sensor while subjecting the vehicle to at least 30 minutes of high-demand driving, replicating actual track conditions." Klaus nodded slowly. "And what would be your proposed solution?" "Three things," Roberto replied without hesitation. "First, install an additional heat shield between the exhaust manifold and the temperature sensor. Second, relocate the sensor a few centimeters further away from the exhaust if the engine design allows it. Third, and most importantly, recalibrate the thermal management software to activate the auxiliary pumps and increase coolant flow more aggressively when it detects high-demand conditions as a preventive measure before the problem manifests itself." There was a moment of silence in the workshop as Klaus and his engineers processed the explanation. Then Klaus smiled, a genuine smile of professional respect. "You know what, Roberto? We're going to try exactly what you suggest. If it works, and I have a hunch it will, I'd like to talk to you about a job offer." Over the next 3 days, Roberto worked alongside the Porsche Mexico technical team to implement his solutions. They manufactured custom heat shields, relocated sensors, and worked with software engineers to adjust thermal management parameters. Klaus had authorized Roberto to have full access to the facilities and had assigned him a temporary workspace. The engineers, initially skeptical of this mechanic without a college degree, gradually began to respect him when they saw the depth of his practical knowledge and his ability to solve problems that they, with all their formal education, had been unable to solve. On the fourth day, they took one of the modified 911 GT3s to the Hermanos Rodriguez racetrack for intensive testing. Roberto accompanied the team, feeling completely surreal to be at that legendary circuit as part of Porsche's technical team. During a 45-minute session of aggressive driving that replicated real racing conditions, they constantly monitored all engine parameters. The cooling system worked perfectly without a single incident of overheating. Klaus looked at the data on his tablet and then looked at Roberto with an expression that mixed respect, admiration, and something else that Roberto couldn't identify. "It worked perfectly," Klaus said. "In 4 days, you solved a problem that our team of engineers couldn't solve in 3 weeks." Roberto felt a mixture of pride and humility. "They have the theoretical knowledge that I will never have, Mr. Klaus. I only have practical experience. Both are important." That night, Klaus invited Roberto to dinner at a German restaurant in Polanco. Roberto felt completely out of place in that elegant establishment, surrounded by executives and people who clearly belonged to a world very different from his. Klaus seemed to notice his discomfort and deliberately chose a more private table in a quiet corner of the restaurant. "Roberto, I want to tell you something about myself," Klaus began after ordering. "I wasn't always the technical director at Porsche. 35 years ago, I was a young apprentice mechanic in a small workshop in Stuttgart, Germany. My father was a factory worker and my mother was a nurse. We didn't have the money for me to go to college, so I started working as an apprentice mechanic when I finished high school." Roberto listened with growing attention, feeling an immediate connection to that story, which resonated so much with his own. "I worked for years as an ordinary mechanic," Klaus continued, "but I was always curious, always wanting to understand not only how to repair something, but why it failed. First, I studied on my own, reading technical manuals and taking night courses. One day, 28 years ago, I was working on a customer's Porsche 911 and identified a design problem in the exhaust system that was causing a loss of power. Not only did I repair the car, but I wrote a detailed report on the problem and sent it directly to Porsche, suggesting a design modification. Klaus paused to take a sip of his beer. 3 weeks later, I received a call from Porsche in Stuttgart. They wanted to know more about my observations. They invited me to their facilities, and after several conversations, they offered me a position in their technical development department. It was my chance to change my life. Over the next few years, I studied mechanical engineering at university while working for Porsche, financed by the company itself. 10 years ago, they sent me here to Mexico to head up technical operations. Roberto began to understand where the conversation was going, but he didn't dare to get his hopes up. "When I saw you at the reception 4 days ago," Klaus said, looking him straight in the eye, "I saw myself 3 decades ago, a talented mechanic who just needed a chance to prove his worth. The way you analyzed our problem, your intuitive knowledge of mechanical systems, your ability to think practically, that can't be taught at any university. That only comes from years of real experience and a genuine passion for understanding how things work." Klaus took an envelope out of his jacket and placed it on the table in front of Roberto. "I want to offer you a position in our technical department, not as an ordinary mechanic, but as a technical specialist in refrigeration and thermal systems. Your job would be to diagnose complex problems, work with our engineers to develop solutions, and share your practical knowledge with the entire team. The salary is $45,000 per month to start, plus full legal benefits, private health insurance for you and your family, and ongoing training opportunities." Roberto felt like the world had stopped. 45,000 a month was more money than he had ever earned in his life. It was enough to give his family a decent life, to send his daughters to good schools, to spare his wife from worrying about every penny spent. "Mr. Klaus, I don't know what to say." Roberto could barely speak through his emotion. "Why are you doing this for me? You hardly know me." "I'm doing this because I recognize talent when I see it," Klaus replied simply, "and because someone did the same for me almost 30 years ago. Part of my responsibility now is to identify and develop talent, no matter where it comes from. You have something that can't be taught in any school, Roberto. You have mechanical intuition, you have real experience, and most importantly, you have a hunger to learn and improve. Those qualities are far more valuable than any college degree." Roberto opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a formal employment contract from Porsche Mexico with all the terms clearly specified. It was real, not a dream. He was holding in his hands a document that would completely change the course of his life and that of his family. "There is one condition," Klaus added with a smile. "I want you to study as well. Porsche will pay for your education if you decide to take engineering courses or specialized technical certifications. It's not mandatory, but I believe you have the potential to go far beyond being just a technical specialist." That night, Roberto arrived at his small house in the agricultural neighborhood of Oriental after midnight. His wife, Claudia, was waiting up for him, worried because he hadn't arrived at his usual time and his phone had been off all day. When Roberto told her everything that had happened, when he showed her the signed contract, when he explained that their financial problems were over, Claudia cried and hugged him tightly. Their 2 young daughters, awakened by the noise, came out of their room and joined the family hug, even though they didn't fully understand what was happening. Roberto started working at Porsche Mexico the following week. The first few months were a period of intense adaptation. He worked directly with engineers who had studied at the best universities in Germany and Mexico, people with master's and doctoral degrees who initially viewed him with some suspicion. What was a street mechanic doing working at the same level as them? But Roberto had learned over 20 years to let his work speak for itself. He didn't try to impress anyone with words. He simply solved problems. And it turned out that Roberto had a special gift for seeing solutions that others did not see. His practical approach perfectly complemented the engineer's theoretical knowledge, where they saw equations and computer simulations. Roberto saw physical components, heat flows, material wear. Gradually, the engineers began to seek him out when they faced problems they could not solve with their conventional methods. A mutual respect developed based on the recognition that both types of knowledge were equally valuable. Klaus watched Roberto's progress with satisfaction. He had taken a chance on that street mechanic, not only because of his technical skills, but because he recognized something deeper in him, that unbreakable determination of people who have struggled to get ahead, that appreciation for opportunities that only those who have lived without them have. Klaus had also discreetly begun a more in-depth investigation of Roberto, wanting to get to know the man he had hired better. What he discovered only confirmed his decision. Roberto Mendoza had an impeccable reputation in all the workshops where he had worked. The owners of those places spoke of him as an exceptional worker, honest to the point of refusing unnecessary jobs, always willing to stay overtime to finish a job well done, respected by his colleagues and admired for his work ethic. The customers Roberto had served for years continued to ask for him, regretting that he was no longer available at the neighborhood workshops. Several taxi owners commented that they only trusted Roberto with their vehicles because they knew he would never charge them for unnecessary repairs and would always leave them running perfectly. 6 months after joining Porsche, Roberto was invited to participate in a special project at the headquarters in Germany. They were developing a new generation of thermal management systems for hybrid and electric models and needed practical feedback from technical teams in different countries. Klaus suggested that Roberto travel to Stuttgart to participate in the development sessions, working directly with the German design engineers. When Klaus told Roberto this, he saw the same flash of disbelief in his eyes that he had seen 6 months earlier at the reception. "Me travel to Germany to work with Porsche engineers?" Roberto asked, genuinely surprised. "But Mr. Klaus, I don't speak German. I can barely get by with basic English." "Will there be a translator?" Klaus replied. "And believe me, Roberto, your knowledge transcends language barriers. The engineers in Stuttgart need exactly what you have, a practical, real-world perspective. They design brilliant systems from a theoretical standpoint, but they need someone who can tell them how those systems will perform in real-world conditions, in the hands of real mechanics, in real service shops." The trip to Germany was a transformative experience for Roberto. He had never left Mexico. He had never imagined he would be sitting in Porsche's legendary facilities in Stuttgart, discussing engine design with some of the world's best automotive engineers. At first, he felt intimidated, surrounded by people speaking languages he didn't understand, working with technology so advanced it seemed like science fiction. But when the technical sessions began, when they started showing him the designs and asking for his opinion, Roberto found his element. He spoke through a translator, but his hands spoke a universal language. He pointed to components, explained how mechanics really worked in the real world, what tools they used, what limitations they faced, what mistakes they commonly made. The German engineers were fascinated by his perspective. One of them, an older man named Dieter, who had worked at Porsche for 40 years, commented in English after a particularly productive session. "Throughout my career, I have worked with hundreds of brilliant engineers, but I have rarely met anyone with the intuitive understanding of mechanical systems that this man has. It is a natural gift." During those 2 weeks in Germany, Roberto absorbed knowledge like a sponge. He observed every process, asked constant questions, and took notes in notebooks that he filled with technical drawings and annotations. The German engineers noticed his hunger to learn and began to include him in additional sessions, showing him aspects of vehicle development that they did not normally share with outside visitors. Klaus, who had traveled with him, watched all this with growing pride. His bet on Roberto was paying off, beyond his most optimistic expectations. One evening during dinner at a traditional German restaurant, Klaus and Roberto shared a conversation that Roberto would never forget. "Do you know what surprises me most about you, Roberto?" Klaus asked. "It's not just your technical talent, which is undeniable, it's your humility. You've worked with some of the best engineers in the world over the past 2 weeks. You've contributed valuable ideas that will probably end up being implemented in the next Porsche models, and yet you still consider yourself just an ordinary mechanic." Roberto reflected on those words. "That's how I see myself, Mr. Klaus. I'm a mechanic. I worked for 20 years repairing taxis and trucks in neighborhood workshops. I don't have a college degree. Everything I know I learned with my hands. Let me tell you something I learned during my career, Klaus replied. College degrees are important, theoretical knowledge is valuable, but what really makes a difference in this world is the ability to solve real problems. You have that ability at a level that few people achieve. Do you know why the engineers in Stuttgart respect you so much? Because you can do something they can't. You can look at a complex system and instinctively understand how it will work in the real world with all its imperfections and variables. That's a gift, Roberto, and it's much rarer than a diploma. When Roberto returned to Mexico, he was transformed, not only by the technical experience he had gained, but also by his renewed confidence in his own value as a professional. He began to participate more actively in the department meetings, sharing his ideas without fear, respectfully challenging the engineer's assumptions when his practical experience told him that something would not work in real-world conditions. His influence on the Porsche Mexico technical team grew significantly. A year after joining the company, Klaus called Roberto into his office. "I have an important proposal for you," Klaus said. "As you know, our network of Porsche dealers and certified workshops in Mexico faces a constant challenge, finding and retaining truly qualified mechanics to work on our vehicles. Most excellent mechanics like you work in independent workshops and never have the opportunity to receive specific training in Porsche technology." Klaus opened a folder and showed Roberto a detailed project. "I want to create a training program for experienced mechanics from independent workshops. The idea is to identify real mechanical talent in Mexico, people like you who have years of practical experience but have never had access to high-level training, and bring them here to train them for 6 months in Porsche technology. At the end of the program, the best graduates would receive job offers in our network of certified workshops or could certify their own independent workshops as authorized service centers." Roberto felt a deep emotion growing in his chest. It was exactly the kind of program that would have changed his life years ago, the kind of opportunity that talented mechanics rarely received. "I want you to run this program," Klaus continued. "You would be the technical training director, responsible for designing the curriculum, selecting candidates, and supervising their training. No one is better qualified than you to identify real mechanical talent and to teach in a way that hands-on mechanics can understand and appreciate. This would mean a promotion to a management position with a salary of $75,000 per month in your own team." Roberto was speechless. In just 1 year, he had gone from being an unemployed mechanic working on traffic lights to being the director of a training program at Porsche. It was a transformation that exceeded his wildest dreams. "I accept," he finally said, his voice full of determination. "And I promise you that this will be the best mechanical training program Porsche has ever had anywhere in the world." Over the next 6 months, Roberto worked tirelessly to design the program. He traveled throughout Mexico, visiting repair shops, talking to experienced mechanics, and understanding their needs and challenges. He designed a curriculum that combined advanced technical theory with intensive practical application, exactly the kind of training he would have greatly valued in his own career. He established selection criteria that prioritized demonstrable practical experience over formal credentials, seeking that same natural talent that Klaus had recognized in him. The call for the first program was launched with great publicity in the Mexican automotive sector. Roberto personally reviewed more than 300 applications from mechanics across the country. Some had worked for decades in family workshops. Others were self-taught technicians who had developed unique specialties. Many had stories similar to his own, exceptional talent limited by lack of opportunity. Roberto selected 20 mechanics for the first program. Among them was a 55-year-old man from Oaxaca who had spent 30 years repairing diesel engines, a 32-year-old woman from Tijuana who was considered the best automatic transmission specialist in her city, a 24-year-old from Veracruz who had learned mechanics by helping his grandfather and had impressive natural talent. Each had a unique story, but they all shared that same passion for understanding how mechanical things work. The program's opening day was emotional for Roberto. Seeing those 20 mechanics gathered at the training center that Porsche had built specifically for the program, Roberto saw 20 versions of himself, talented people who would finally have the opportunity to prove their true worth. "Welcome," Roberto said in his opening speech. "Each of you is here because you have something special, a natural talent for understanding mechanical systems that cannot be taught in any school. Over the next 6 months, we are going to combine that natural talent with advanced technical knowledge about the most sophisticated vehicles in the world. It won't be easy, it will be intensive and demanding, but in the end, each of you will have the skills and certifications to work at the highest level of the automotive industry. Roberto paused, his voice thick with emotion. Just 18 months ago, I was working at a traffic light, offering my services as a mobile mechanic, desperately trying to earn enough money to feed my family. Someone believed in me and gave me an opportunity that completely changed my life. Now it's my turn to give those opportunities. Each of you deserves to be here, and each of you has the potential to go as far as your dedication and passion will take you. The program was a resounding success. The 20 mechanics threw themselves into the training, absorbing knowledge with the gratitude of those who know they are receiving a unique opportunity. Roberto proved to be an exceptional instructor, able to explain complex technical concepts in terms that practical mechanics could immediately understand. The Porsche engineers, who participated as instructors, were impressed by the students' level of understanding and practical skill. At the end of the 6-month program, all 20 graduates received official Porsche certifications as specialized technicians. 18 of them received immediate job offers from Porsche certified workshops in different parts of Mexico. The other two decided to certify their own independent workshops as authorized service centers with full technical support from Porsche. Klaus observed the results of the program with deep satisfaction. Not only had they created a pipeline of highly skilled mechanics for Porsche's service network in Mexico, but they had also demonstrated a model that could be replicated in other countries. The headquarters in Germany was so impressed that it requested Roberto to travel to Stuttgart again to present the program to Porsche's global service and training directors. Years after that day, when Roberto had nervously entered the Porsche Mexico facility, he was standing in the main auditorium of the headquarters in Stuttgart, presenting his training program to more than 50 Porsche executives and directors from around the world. He spoke confidently, relying on slides he had prepared himself, sharing success statistics, and showing videos of the graduate mechanics working with excellence in certified workshops in Mexico. At the end of his presentation, he received a standing ovation. Porsche's global CEO, an impeccably dressed German man whom Roberto had only seen before in photographs, approached him personally to congratulate him. Germando Doza said in English with an accent, "What you have created is not just a training program, it is a model for how to identify and develop real talent no matter where it comes from. We will be implementing versions of your program in all our major markets." That night, during the event's closing dinner, Klaus and Roberto shared a quiet table in a corner of the elegant restaurant. "Do you remember our first dinner 2 years ago?" Klaus asked with a smile. When I told him my story and offered him his first position at Porsche, Roberto nodded, smiling at the memory. It seemed so unreal at the time, like a dream he was afraid to wake up from. "That night I told you that I saw in you what someone had seen in me decades ago," Klaus continued. "I want you to know that you have exceeded all my expectations. Not only did you become an excellent technical specialist, but also a leader who is changing lives and multiplying opportunities. The impact you are having goes far beyond repairing cars." Klaus paused, his expression becoming more serious. "There's another reason I brought you to Germany for this event. The global directors were so impressed with your program that they want to expand your role. They are offering you the position of Global Director of Technical Talent Development for Porsche. You would be responsible for implementing and overseeing programs similar to yours in all Porsche markets around the world. You would work out of Stuttgart for half the year and travel constantly to different countries. It's a high-level executive position with a salary that's good enough that you'll never have to worry about money again." Roberto felt a mixture of pride, gratitude, and a certain melancholy. "It's an incredible offer, Mr. Klaus, but I need to think about it carefully. I have my family in Mexico, my daughters are in school, my wife has her life there. And besides," Roberto smiled with a certain shyness, "there's something I want to do in Mexico that would be impossible if I moved to Germany." "What is it?" Klaus asked, intrigued. "I want to expand the program beyond Porsche," Roberto explained. "I want to create an independent training center that trains mechanics in all types of vehicles and technologies, not just luxury brands. There are thousands of talented mechanics in Mexico who work mainly with popular vehicles, taxis, cargo trucks, commercial vehicles. They also deserve access to high-level training. I've been saving money, researching possibilities, talking to potential partners. I think I can create something meaningful. Klaus looked at Roberto with an unreadable expression. Then he smiled broadly. You know what I like most about that answer? That you're not just thinking about your own advancement, but how you can help more people. That's exactly what someone who truly understands the value of opportunities would do. Klaus took out his phone and quickly typed something. Let me make a counteroffer. How about Porsche invests in your independent training center as a minority partner? You would have complete control of the center and the freedom to train mechanics in any brand or technology. Porsche would provide equipment, technical support, and industry connections. In return, the center would become a talent pipeline for the entire Mexican automotive industry, not just Porsche. It would be an investment in the development of the entire sector. Roberto felt his heart beating fast. I'm serious, completely serious, Klaus replied. I've learned that the best investments are not always those that generate the highest immediate financial return, but those that create real value in the long term. His training center would create value for the entire Mexican automotive industry, raise the overall level of technical competence, and in the process help hundreds of talented mechanics reach their potential. That is worth much more than the numbers on a financial statement. 6 months later, the Center of Excellence in Automotive Technology opened its doors in an industrial complex on the outskirts of Mexico City. It was a modern 2,000 square meter facility equipped with state-of-the-art diagnostic technology, specialized tools, and areas for both theoretical and practical training. Roberto was the general manager, leading a team of instructors that included several graduates of his original Porsche program, now turned teachers for the next generation. The center offered multiple training programs, from basic automotive mechanics courses to advanced specializations in hybrid, electric, and computerized diagnostic systems. Unlike traditional technical schools that required years of theoretical study, Roberto's programs were designed for mechanics who already had practical experience but wanted to update and formalize their knowledge. The center's first generation included 40 students from various parts of Mexico. Roberto applied the same selection criteria he had used at Porsche, prioritizing demonstrable talent over formal credentials. Among the students were experienced mechanics looking to upgrade their skills, talented young people from families of mechanics, and even a few special cases that Roberto had personally identified. One of those special cases was a 42-year-old man named Francisco, who had worked for 20 years repairing taxis and minibuses in small workshops in the Itapalapa neighborhood. Francisco had a story eerily similar to Roberto's. Exceptional talent limited by economic circumstances, no opportunities for formal education, living day-to-day with low-paying jobs. Roberto had met him by chance when his personal car had a problem in an area where Francisco worked. The way Francisco diagnosed and repaired the problem reminded Roberto of his own approach, that combination of intuition and practical knowledge that cannot be taught. Roberto had personally gone to find Francisco a few days later, offering him a full scholarship for the training program. Francisco had initially refused, saying he couldn't stop working for 6 months because he had a family to feed. Roberto solved that too, offering him a monthly stipend equivalent to what he earned at his workshop, personally financed by himself until Francisco finished the program and found a better-paying job. During the center's opening ceremony, Roberto gave a speech summarizing his journey and his vision. It started 3 years ago. I was standing at a traffic light with my hands dirty from grease, offering to fix cars for a few pesos, wondering how I was going to feed my family. A series of extraordinary events, beginning with an act of faith by one person who believed in me, completely transformed my life. Roberto looked at Klaus, who was sitting in the front row alongside several Porsche executives and representatives from other automotive companies that had expressed interest in partnering with the center. I learned that talent exists everywhere, but opportunities do not. There are thousands of mechanics in Mexico with exceptional skills who will never have the chance to prove their true worth simply because they were born into the wrong circumstances, because they did not have access to formal education, because no one gave them a chance. His voice was charged with emotion. This center exists to change that. Here, we don't care where you come from or what schools you attended. We care about what you can do, how much you want to learn, and how dedicated you are to your craft. If you have talent and passion for automotive mechanics, this place is for you, regardless of your personal history. Roberto looked out into the audience and found Francisco, who was sitting with the other students. Every person in this program represents a story of talent waiting to be recognized. My commitment to each of you is simple. We will give you the knowledge, tools, and connections you need to reach your full potential. The rest is up to you. The center's early years were marked by explosive growth. Roberto's model proved to be extraordinarily successful. Graduates of the program had employability rates above 95%, with most landing positions that paid significantly more than their previous jobs. Automotive companies began to see the center as a reliable source of genuine technical talent, mechanics who combine practical experience with up-to-date technical knowledge. Francisco's story was particularly inspiring. During the training program, he proved to be one of the most talented students, particularly in the diagnosis of complex electrical systems. Upon graduation, he received job offers from 3 different premium car dealerships, ultimately accepting a position as a specialist technician at a BMW dealership with a salary of $38,000 per month, more than triple what he had previously earned. 2 years later, Francisco had become supervisor of the technical department, leading a team of 8 mechanics. But what was most significant was what Francisco did with his newfound success. Following Roberto's example, Francisco began identifying talented mechanics in neighborhood workshops, people in situations similar to the one he had been in. He paid for the training of 3 young mechanics at Roberto's center using his own savings. "Someone did this for me," Francisco explained to Roberto when he told him his plan. "It's my responsibility to do the same for others." Roberto listened to this with tears in his eyes. The virtuous cycle that had begun when Klaus believed in him was multiplying exponentially. Each person who received an opportunity eventually became someone who created opportunities for others. 5 years after that day when Roberto had nervously entered Porsche Mexico, the Center of Excellence in Automotive Technology had trained more than 400 mechanics from all over Mexico and had begun to expand with a second location in Monterrey. Roberto had become a respected figure in the Mexican automotive industry, regularly invited as a speaker at industry events and consulted by companies on technical talent development strategies. But what Roberto valued most was not the recognition or business success. It was receiving messages from graduates of the center telling him how the program had transformed their lives, how they could now provide a better life for their families, how they had regained dignity and pride in their work. It was seeing people like Francisco who not only changed their own lives, but helped change the lives of others. It was knowing that he was making a real and lasting impact on the Mexican automotive sector. One Friday afternoon, Roberto was in his office reviewing applications for the next generation of the program when he received a call from Klaus. "Roberto, I need you to come to Porsche on Monday," Klaus said without preamble. "There's someone who wants to meet you." On Monday, Roberto arrived at the Porsche Mexico facility with curiosity. Klaus was waiting for him in the lobby with an older man in his, impeccably dressed in a suit that Roberto recognized as extremely expensive, even without knowing much about fashion. There was something about the man's posture and presence that denoted authority and considerable success. "Roberto, meet Ferdinand Porsche III, Klaus said with a smile. Roberto felt his heart skip a beat. Ferdinand Porsche III was the legendary founder of the brand, a member of the Porsche Supervisory Board, and one of the most influential figures in the European automotive industry. "Herr Mendoza," said Ferdinand in German with Klaus translating. "I have been following your story and your work over the last few years. Klaus has kept me informed about your progress, your training program at Porsche, and now your independent center of excellence. I am here because I wanted to meet you personally and talk about something important." Ferdinand invited Roberto to his temporary office in the building. Over the next 2 hours, Ferdinand shared an ambitious vision. He wanted Roberto's training model to expand internationally, starting with other countries in Latin America and eventually reaching emerging markets in Africa and Asia. Porsche, along with other leading automotive companies, was prepared to invest significantly in this expansion, creating a global network of training centers based on Roberto's model. "What you have demonstrated," Ferdinand explained, is that there is a vast reservoir of technical talent in communities that have traditionally been ignored by the formal automotive industry. Experienced mechanics working in small workshops, repairing old vehicles, keeping public transportation fleets running with minimal resources. These people have real and valuable skills, but they have never had access to modern technology or formal training. Your model shows that we can identify that talent, develop it, and in the process create value for both the people and the industry. Ferdinand paused, looking directly at Roberto. I want you to lead this global expansion. You would be the executive director of the foundation we are creating specifically for this purpose. The Global Foundation for the Development of Automotive Technical Talent. You would have complete autonomy to operate the centers, substantial resources for expansion, and the backing of some of the largest companies in the global automotive industry. Roberto listened to the proposal with a mixture of amazement and overwhelm. It was an extraordinary opportunity to multiply the impact of his work on a global scale, but it would also mean constant travel, time away from his family, and enormous responsibilities. I need time to think about it and talk to my family, Roberto replied honestly. It's an incredible offer, but it also represents a huge change in my life. Of course, Ferdinand replied, take all the time you need, but I want you to know that you were not chosen solely for your technical skills or your business success. You were chosen because you understand something fundamental that many business leaders never grasp. That talent exists everywhere, but opportunities do not. And that creating those opportunities is both a moral responsibility and a smart business strategy. That night, Roberto spoke at length with Claudia, his wife, who had been his unwavering support throughout his journey. Claudia had seen Roberto transform from an unemployed and desperate mechanic to a respected leader in the industry. She had witnessed how that transformation had not fundamentally changed him as a person, how Roberto had maintained his humility, his empathy for others in difficult situations, his commitment to using his success to help others. I think you should accept, Claudia finally said, not because we need the money or the prestige, but because there are thousands of people in the world who are where you were 5 years ago, talented mechanics who just need an opportunity. If you can create those opportunities on a global scale, it's your responsibility to do so. Roberto accepted the position. Over the next 3 years under his leadership, the foundation established training centers in 8 countries in Latin America, 2 in Africa, and 3 in Asia. Each center was adapted to the local context but based on the fundamental principles Roberto had developed, identifying real practical talent, combining experience with up-to-date technical knowledge, creating direct connections with employers, and maintaining standards of excellence without compromising accessibility. Thousands of experienced mechanics from marginalized communities received training that transformed their lives and those of their families. The global automotive industry began to recognize what Roberto had demonstrated, that exceptional technical talent could be found in the most unexpected places if one was willing to look beyond formal credentials and superficial appearances. A decade after that chance encounter at the Porsche Mexico reception, Roberto stood on stage at the World Automotive Industry Congress in Detroit, receiving the award for transformational leadership in talent development. The audience of more than 3,000 executives, engineers, and automotive industry professionals from around the world greeted him with a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. In his acceptance speech, Roberto told his full story for the first time in such a large forum. He spoke of his days working at traffic lights, of his desperation to feed his family, of how Klaus had believed in him when no one else had. He spoke about what he had learned during his journey, that talent exists everywhere, but opportunities do not. That formal credentials matter much less than actual competence and character. That true success is not measured by how much you have achieved, but by how many lives you have helped transform. 11 years ago, Roberto concluded, I was a hopeless mechanic, invisible to society, considered worthless by most people. One person saw beyond my appearance and circumstances, saw my potential, my passion, my commitment to excellence. That person gave me an opportunity that changed my life forever. Roberto looked out into the audience and found Klaus, now retired, but present at the event, especially to see this moment. The biggest lesson I learned from that experience was not technical. It was that each of us in positions of influence has a responsibility to look for talent where others do not look, to create opportunities where others see obstacles, to believe in people when they themselves have stopped believing. If my story can inspire even one person in this room to give a chance to someone who deserves it but seems unlikely, then it will all have been worth it. The ovation was deafening. After the event, dozens of people approached Roberto to share their own stories, to thank him for his work, to explore how they could replicate his model in their own companies and countries. But the most meaningful interaction that night was with Klaus. The two men embraced like the friends they had become during a decade of collaboration and mutual respect. "I'm proud of you," Klaus said, "not just for what you've accomplished, but for who you've become. You took the opportunity you were given and multiplied it 1,000-fold, creating opportunities for thousands of other people. That's true legacy." Roberto smiled, feeling a deep satisfaction that came not from the accolades or professional success, but from knowing that he had used his life to create a meaningful and lasting impact. "It all started because you decided to look beyond my appearance that day at the reception," Roberto replied. "You taught me that a single decision to give someone a chance can change not just one life, but hundreds or thousands of lives in a ripple effect." That night in his hotel room in Detroit, Roberto called Claudia and his daughters, now teenagers who were studying at good schools and had opportunities he had never had. He told them about the award, about the event, but most of all, he told them about the importance of using whatever success they achieved in life to help others. "The true measure of success," he told his daughters, "is not how much money you make or how high you climb, but how many lives you touch positively along the way. Never forget that the opportunities you have are not just for yourselves, but so that you can create opportunities for others." When he hung up the phone, Roberto sat in front of the window watching the lights of Detroit shining in the night. He thought about the desperate mechanic he had been 11 years ago. He thought about all the talented mechanics around the world who were still waiting for their chance to experience the transformative power of simply believing in people's potential. Roberto Mendoza's journey, from that traffic light in Mexico City to the stage of the World Automotive Industry Congress, was not just a story of personal achievement. It was a testament to the multiplier effect of opportunity, a demonstration that talent and human potential exist everywhere, waiting to be recognized, and living proof that gestures of faith in people can generate waves of transformation that expand far beyond the imaginable. And it all started with a poor mechanic who walked into a Porsche factory without knowing that what he would do there would eventually shock not only the engineers at that company, but an entire global industry. Yeah.